Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. And here I am with Monsignor Kupke. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. So, Monsignor Kupke, we left the Italians kind of wrapping up with Monsignor
the great
Cianci.
Carlo Cianci, yes.
And so in your book after, and I'm not sure we read in the book the story of Cianci and Brady, which was kind of exciting, but
range warfare in downtown Paterson.
Yeah, right. So we're going to leave the Italians who are coming in waves, I guess.
Yes.
And we're going to move to the Poles. Interesting detail. You said that the government census of 1890 said that there were 3,600 Poles in all of New Jersey.
Yes.
Whereas Bishop Wigger's report said that there were 5,000 in Newark alone.
Yeah.
So what's going on with the discrepancy in numbers?
Well, you have national boundaries being changed. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire did not always identify Poles as Poles.
Okay.
For example, my grandfather, who was Slovak, on his entry papers is listed as an Austrian.
Okay, and this is on your mother's side?
Yeah.
Okay. You have Slovak in you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so when we get there, you're going to have a lot to say. So was any of this because there were people here on paper and people here not on paper?
I don't think so, not with the Poles.
Okay.
With the Italians, certainly. The Italians confuse demographers constantly because they go back and forth.
Okay.
Several of the Italians, many of the Italians, emigrated 2 or 3 times to the United States. They would come, make some money, and then go back. And then when they needed more money, they'd come back again.
And what were immigration laws like at this point?
They were pretty strict for permanent
residents,
but
yeah.
But it was all whether you were A, healthy,
okay, and
B, whether you had a job here. If there was the promise of employment for you.
And if you came and you were not healthy?
They'll send you back,
And if you came and you didn't have a job lined up? Not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the Poles...
This is when the Italians come, and it translates into Italian New Jersey even today. When the Italians come to the New York metropolitan area, this is the period when there's an enormous building expansion. So, for example, this is the period when streets are being paved, when telephone lines are being put underground, when massive buildings are being built. Like the Newark archives have pictures of the Italian stonemasons that worked on Sacred Heart Basilica in Newark, because that was being built. Okay. The Essex County Courthouse, the College of St. Elizabeth right next door to us.
Yes, and those were Italian stonemasons who were working on that.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, this was the work available to them when they first came over. If you think of the Italian community in New Jersey today, the numbers of pavers, the guys who do your driveway, rebuild your steps, all of those small little companies that are heavily, occupied by Italians. This goes back to their first family members who immigrated to the United States, because that was the much like the Irish canal diggers of a century earlier.
Okay.
This was what was going on in America. This was the industry that needed help.
Yeah.
So they funneled in from being farmers in Italy to being construction workers in the United States.
And you said in the Newark archives?
In the archives of the Archdiocese of Newark, they have photos of the Italian stonemasons that worked on Sacred Heart Basilica. I think you would find the same thing in the archives of St. John the Divine in Manhattan. This was when those types of buildings were being built, and it needed a lot of labor.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the other buildings that were
the Essex County Courthouse in Newark, the College of St. Elizabeth next door to us. Okay. I think they have photos as well.
Okay. So we're in the period of right around the 1900s. So the Italians are coming, and are the Poles coming at the same time?
The Poles are coming at the same time.
Okay. And
everybody's coming at the same time.
Wow.
It was a very difficult time to be a bishop because you tried to...
The intercultural challenges.
Yes. And trying to provide pastorally for all these different groups. And in many cases, the clergy that first came over were not the best clergy. These were the ones who were having trouble in Europe already. So America looked like a good deal to them, and they would come over and, with Bishop Wigger, he would try these guys on a ad hoc basis, and then it would last 6 months, and then...
Was there a habit then of appointing administrators first before you appointed pastors? Because that happens now sometimes.
Sometimes,
okay. Yeah. So the Poles coming are Catholic and devout, you say?
Yes.
So
in many ways, the Polish identity is interwoven into the Catholic identity. In a time when Poland itself is not necessarily a viable national country in the way that we know it today. The Polish identity is interwoven with being Catholic.
So just remind me, what was the status of Poland at this time? This is before World War I.
Yeah. So you're dealing with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire.
And so are the Polish people split between
several directions, the German Empire.
Okay.
And then that will get readjusted again after World War II.
So I think St. Nick's in Passaic was the beginning of Polish outreach.
St. Nicholas is the only one of the 11 Catholic parishes in Passaic that has boundaries. It is the parish for the entire city of Passaic.
Oh.
The others are all ethnic parishes. So, once you subtract each group from the mix, St. Nick's has whatever is left. But in its heyday, St. Nick's was much like Dean McNulty in the cathedral.
The start of
the
things
welcoming committee for who's ever coming into town.
Okay.
Except that the pastor in St. Nick's was more forward-thinking in terms of, and more welcoming to these different ethnic groups.
And that pastor was?
Shepherd.
Shepherd, okay. Yeah. I have him starred here that we need to talk about him. So Shepherd is not a Polish name.
No. Actually, Shepherd is a Paterson boy.
Okay.
Shepherd Lane, where the Little Sisters of the Poor are. This is his family farm.
Wow. And it's spelled differently than Shepherd.
Right,
two P's A-R-D. Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Shepherd and his evangelizing style.
He's a mover and a shaker in his day. He will become Vicar General of Newark at one point.
Okay.
But as pastor of St. Nicholas, he was willing to help these different groups get on a foothold in the city of Passaic as they come in. Oddly enough, the Italians, this is where they start. The oldest Italian parish in the diocese is Sacred Heart in Clifton.
Yes.
Which starts out for mill workers, silk workers.
Oh, yeah, we did
in the
talk
botany
about that.
mills of Passaic.
Yeah.
But the Poles come late 1880s, early 1890s.
Okay.
And Shepherd kind of helps arrange a priest to come and say Mass for them from Newark. And then gradually out of that, St. Joseph's is built first, and then Holy Rosary at a later date.
Okay. So I have a note here that the Poles are, we said Catholic and devout, but also fiercely independent and distrustful of authority.
Yes, particularly Irish bishops.
Okay.
Basically, how
about Irish American bishops?
Them too.
Yeah, okay.
Basically, the arrangement in the other side was that whoever built the church owned the church. So in many cases, churches in Eastern Europe are originally built either by local barons, dukes, whatever.
A nobleman of some kind.
A castle chapel type thing.
And ends up serving the people.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they will build a church on their estate for their workers, but they own the church.
So in one of your footnotes, you call this the Jus
Jus patronatum,
patronatum.
right.
Yeah.
The law of the patron. Whoever owns it runs it.
Wow.
So when they come to this country, they're confronted, with this whole thing about, the voluntary
Donations.
contribution to build a church. No.
Yeah.
So it takes them a while to get their minds around that this is not something that somebody's going to provide for them.
Right.
But then once they get their mind around that, then they say, well, we built it.
We paid for
We
it.
paid for it. We own it.
We are the patrons.
Right. We are the patrons.
Yeah.
Whatever was the custom in Europe continues in this country. So there are some hot fights over this. Like surrendering the deed to the church to the bishop was a tough call.
Now, why
in many of these places?
Why were they distrustful of authority?
Because they had been bandied about so many times. Somebody described Poland for me one time, and this may or may not be accurate, that it's like a saucer in the middle of Eastern Europe. It's like flat.
Yes.
And like armies just roll across it from one direction, then they come back the other way.
Yeah.
So they have been bandied about by several different, even the Swedes have gotten involved in Poland at one point.
Wow.
So, they're an area
yeah.
that's overdue for their own independence.
Yeah, and was it rebellion against civil authority, but also ecclesiastical authority?
So, especially if it's not Polish.
Oh, got it. Yeah, if it's somebody else who's bossing them around.
Basically, there will develop in the United States a schismatic Polish church, the Polish National Catholic Church.
Yeah, so we're going to get there, but
Right.
but was Shepherd involved in any way with this fierce independence and this?
I think he was aware of it, but
He was working hard for them.
yeah, and there were so many groups; it was hard to keep them straight. You can imagine for Irish and Irish American priests who have no knowledge of Eastern Europe,
Yes.
to suddenly have all of these groups coming and insisting that they're different from one another.
Yeah.
It blew their minds. They were dealing with a whole area that, there's the famous scene between Archbishop Ireland in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the first Byzantine priest to come to the United States. And Ireland had no experience of this. This may have been a footnote in a church history book he read in the seminary 35 years earlier, but he had no practical
knowledge of the Eastern rites.
When the guy told him that he was married, Ireland just his eyes bugged out and he threw him out of the office. So you're no Catholic priest.
Now, this is an aside, but was Bishop Ireland Irish?
No, he was American born.
How do you end up with a name like Ireland?
He was Irish, but,
Yeah.
Irish American.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So 1897 I have here is the formation of the Polish National Catholic Church. And how does this happen and what's going on?
Basically, you have a lot of resentment among many of the Poles over a number of issues. One of them is the hierarchy, which is entirely at this point Irish.
Okay.
They have the Germans.
It's not so bad, I don't think.
Well, the Germans have just barely managed to get one or two bishops, in the
Wigger.
Well, yeah, and
German
also
American.
like in Milwaukee and
Okay.
that area.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's
Predominantly.
it's all Irish.
Yeah.
So the fact that they are squeezed out of the hierarchy altogether as their numbers grow. But in addition to that, there are the issues of providing, in their own language for them. Not that they're saying Mass in Polish. This is still in Latin. But people to preach, hear confessions, devotions.
Yeah, which would be big.
Yeah. Secondly, the issue of their sense that they are oppressed by the bishops and the local pastors. Thirdly, the fact that of the ownership of the church. This is a big thing.
Yeah. So I have a note that's, I can't remember who, but somebody bought property without asking.
The Holy Rosary of Passaic. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they just decided they were going to start a church or something? Or
They wanted a second church in Passaic. And I think it also has to do with what part of Poland they were from.
Oh, okay.
On the other side. And they incorporated themselves,
And so when somebody pushes back, they decide to go on their own?
They do. Bishop O'Connor, by this point, the fourth Bishop of Newark, he's much better at this than Wigger was. But, he knew when to...
I'm just realizing we haven't used the joke, we're wigged out. Did we use that? I don't think we ever use it. Sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
O'Connor was a little bit more suave and political, and
he
knew when to press them,
Irish American,
and knew when to back off and say, all right, they're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe I should just let them go ahead and do this. And so by his time, things were beginning to calm down. But that also happened in Booton with St. Cyril and Methodius. They also jumped the gun before O'Connor was able to.
But they didn't go independent.
No.
But the other folks, did somebody start St. Peter and St. Paul?
Yeah, there had already been a split in Passaic earlier, creating a whole PNCC ethnic parish.
Polish National Catholic
Church.
Yeah.
So that when Holy Rosary
Not the bank.
begins to, suggest that they're going to incorporate another Polish, O'Connor.
Decides he's going to soft pedal it.
Yeah. But the whole issue of ownership of the church, and then the other one that they cite over and over again is midnight Mass on Christmas.
Yes.
This is a big deal for the Irish American clergy. Their major struggle, at the time, was alcoholism. And they saw midnight Mass in their experience as an occasion for drunkenness and rioting and everything. Yes. So the Diocese of Newark banned, as many American dioceses did, banned midnight Mass on Christmas. So when the Poles get here,
they can't understand this.
With this rich Christmas Eve tradition.
Vigilia, is it?
The Vigilia, right, which ends with midnight Mass on Christmas. And all of a sudden there's some Irish bishop telling them they can't have this.
Wow.
This is a big deal. One pastor in the Midwest actually got shot over this issue. So.
Okay. That's the third time I think we've had shootings on this.
It
Or
was the
maybe
Wild
second.
West, even though it was New Jersey.
So I just have to interject here. When I was a young priest at St. Peter's in Parsippany, we had the masses in the auditorium and masses in the small church.
Right.
And Monsignor Kevin Flanagan became the pastor from Ireland. And I don't know if it was our first or second Christmas in the auditorium, but we had midnight mass at that point.
Yeah.
And people would,
Be packed in.
but they also would be coming from Christmas
Parties.
Eve celebrations. And it was a lot, back then it was a lot of young adults who would come. And it was pretty dicey. Well, the year that drunken young man stumbled into the credence table at the back of church, not the church where the gifts were, at the back, knocking over the hosts and the wine that were going to be brought up, I knew that Flanagan had it. So midnight mass next year became, I think, 10 o'clock mass.
Yeah.
So
Well, this was what the American bishops were dealing with. And they were.
That was 1980s, the end of the 80s.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. This was a whole social issue that was
the alcoholism.
right in the front of their concerns. And, when you think of what Dean McNulty did to try and combat this on a weekly basis, midnight mass on Christmas was a no-brainer. We just don't have it.
Right. Wow.
Nothing to incite them.
Well, when we meet again, we're going to maybe just touch finally on the Poles, and then we're going to move to your people, the Slovaks.
Oh, the little Slovaks, yes.
Yes, so we'll start with them the next time we get together.
All right.
Let's leave it there. I want all of you who are listening or watching to make sure that you keep an eye out or an ear out for the next episode of Coffee with Kupke. In order to stay on top of new releases, make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you are on YouTube, please do drop a like and hit the bell for notifications. While you're at it, make sure to check out the other shows produced by the diocese. Those shows are Beyond the Beacon, hosted by Bishop Kevin Sweeney and Jay Agnish, our Director of Communications, and the Paul Street Journal, hosted by Brian Hansberger and Freddie Garcia. I want to give a special thanks to Joe Ginexi, our sound and visual engineer, Caitlin Ferrari, who's involved in pre- and post-production, and Freddie Garcia, who's helping out with this podcast in addition to doing his own. With all that said, I just want to thank you for joining us in Coffee with Kupke. Keep making Catholic history in the Diocese of Paterson.